When a disfigured woman walks into a crowded cafe, every head turns, but not in welcome. The whispers cut like knives. She's already reaching for the door to escape when a stranger does the unthinkable. He crosses the room, takes her scarred hand, and holds it in front of everyone. That single act of defiance will cost him everything: his job, his reputation, maybe even his daughter. But some choices can't be undone. Some moments change two broken lives forever. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey reaches. The afternoon cold pressed against the windows of Miller's coffee house like an unwelcome visitor, fogging the glass and turning the world outside into smudged watercolor shades of gray. Inside, warmth bloomed from the hissing espresso machine and the low murmur of Saturday conversations, the kind of ordinary comfort people take for granted until it's ripped away. Ethan Brooks sat alone at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee that had gone lukewarm 20 minutes ago. He wasn't drinking it. He was just holding it, staring at nothing, the way a man does when exhaustion has become his default state. His work jacket, stained with paint and plaster dust, hung over the back of his chair. His jeans were worn through at the knees. His face, though only 32 years old, carried the kind of weariness that made strangers assume he was older. He'd come here to think, or maybe to not think. The distinction didn't matter much anymore. Across from him, his daughter's empty chair waited. 7-year-old Sophie was at a birthday party 3 blocks away, and he had exactly 45 minutes before pickup. 45 minutes to sit in a place that wasn't their cramped apartment, wasn't a construction site, wasn't anywhere that required him to be on. To perform the role of functional adult, capable father, man who had it together. He didn't have it together. He was barely holding the pieces. The cafe door chimed. Ethan didn't look up. People came and went. The world turned. None of it concerned him. But then the room changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in the atmosphere, like air pressure dropping before a storm. Conversations didn't stop, but they stuttered. Voices lowered. Chairs scraped as people adjusted their positions, angling away from the entrance. Ethan glanced up. A young woman stood just inside the doorway, one hand still on the handle as if she might bolt at any second. She was maybe 25, slender, wearing an oversized gray coat that looked expensive despite her obvious attempt to disappear inside it. A wool scarf covered the lower half of her face, and dark hair fell across her forehead, nearly obscuring her eyes. But it was those eyes that caught him first. Wide. Terrified. Already filling with the kind of shame that comes from being seen. She took one hesitant step forward, and the scarf slipped. The room's reaction was immediate. A woman near the window actually gasped, a small, sharp sound that she tried to cover with a cough. The businessman at the counter turned away so quickly he nearly knocked over his laptop. 2 college students at a center table stopped mid-sentence, staring with the kind of horrified fascination people reserve for car accidents. Ethan saw why. The right side of this young woman's face was a landscape of scar tissue, thick, raised welts that ran from her jawline up to her temple, pulling the corner of her mouth into a permanent asymmetry. The scarring continued down her neck and disappeared beneath her collar. Her skin, where it was visible, showed the telltale signs of burn trauma, the unnatural smoothness, the discoloration, the way it seemed to pull too tight in some places and sag in others. She was beautiful and destroyed all at once. Her hand flew up to adjust the scarf, trying to cover what everyone had already seen. Her breath came quick and shallow. Panic attack. Ethan recognized it immediately. He'd had enough of them himself. "Oh my God," someone whispered, not quietly enough. The young woman flinched as if she'd been slapped. She turned toward the door, and something in Ethan Brooks, something he thought had died 2 years ago when his wife walked out and never looked back, suddenly woke up. He stood. His chair scraped loud against the floor. Every eye in the cafe swiveled to him. He didn't care. He was already moving, weaving between tables, his coffee-stained work boots heavy on the hardwood floor. The woman had the door half open, cold air rushing in. "Wait," Ethan said. She froze, didn't turn around, just stood there, trembling, 1 foot already on the sidewalk. He stopped 3 feet away, careful not to crowd her. "Please don't go." Now she did turn, slowly, and he saw her face fully for the first time. The left side was perfect, elegant bone structure, clear skin, eyes the color of storm clouds. The right side told a story of unspeakable pain. Together, they formed something achingly human. Her voice cracked. I shouldn't have come here. Why not? Ethan kept his tone gentle, the same way he talked to Sophie after a nightmare. You have as much right to coffee as anyone. A bitter laugh escaped her. Have you looked around? He had. Every person in the cafe was watching them now, not even pretending otherwise. Some faces showed pity, others showed disgust thinly veiled as concern. A few showed nothing at all, the worst kind, the ones who'd already decided she wasn't worth acknowledging as fully human. I see a bunch of people who need to mind their own business, Ethan said, loud enough that his voice carried. The woman's eyes widened. You don't have to. I'm Ethan. He extended his hand, just held it there, steady, between them. She stared at his hand like it was a trap, like kindness was something that would spring shut and hurt her. Her breathing was still too fast, still edging toward hyperventilation. You don't know me, she whispered. You don't know what people will think if you. I know you deserve to get a coffee without being treated like a monster. His hand didn't waver. And I know that whatever people think about me stopped mattering a long time ago. That last part wasn't entirely true. He cared what people thought, cared desperately, because their opinions could affect his ability to find work, to keep custody of Sophie, to survive in a world that crushed people like him every day. But in this moment, watching this woman's hand shake as she fought between flight and the tiniest hope that maybe, just maybe, someone might see her as human, in this moment, he didn't give a damn. Slowly, so slowly, she reached out. Her hand was cold when it touched his. Small. The skin on her palm was smooth where the burns hadn't reached, but her fingers were ridged with scar tissue. She gripped his hand like she was gripping a lifeline. The cafe went completely silent. Ethan didn't let go. He stood there in front of 20 strangers who were judging them both, and he held her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, like there was nothing wrong, nothing shocking, nothing that required explanation. I'm Mara, she said finally, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. Nice to meet you, Mara. He smiled, not a pitying smile, not a brave smile, just a regular smile between two people meeting for the first time. You want to sit down? I was just wasting time anyway. She looked past him at his corner table, then back at the room full of staring faces. Her grip on his hand tightened. They'll get over it. Ethan gently guided her away from the door, letting it swing shut against the cold. Or they won't. Either way, you still deserve coffee. He felt her resistance, every instinct screaming at her to run, but something in his steady presence, or maybe just the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from years of hiding, made her follow. They crossed the cafe together. Every step felt like walking through deep water. Ethan was acutely aware of the weight of attention, the way conversations had completely died, the way the barista had stopped mid-pour to watch. Mara's hand in his had started shaking so badly he was afraid she'd collapse. Almost there, he murmured. Just a few more steps. They reached his table. He pulled out the chair Sophie had been supposed to sit in, and Mara sank into it like her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Ethan sat down across from her, positioning himself so his back was to most of the room, a small shield, however inadequate. Mara's hands were clasped tight in her lap now, her head down, hair falling forward to hide as much of her face as possible. Breathe, Ethan said softly. In through your nose, out through your mouth. You're doing fine. This was a mistake. Her voice was barely audible. I should never have. My father warned me. Your father? She didn't answer, just kept her head down, struggling for air. Ethan glanced toward the counter. The barista, a college-age kid with a man bun and liberal arts politics probably stamped on his laptop, was still staring. Ethan caught his eye and gestured toward the menu board. The kid blinked, shook himself, and finally went back to work. What do you drink? Ethan asked Mara. What? Coffee? Tea? Hot chocolate? What sounds good? She finally looked up at him, confusion breaking through the panic. Why are you being nice to me? The question hit harder than it should have. Why was he? He'd spent 2 years building walls, keeping everyone at arm's length, focusing solely on Sophie and survival. He'd convinced himself he had nothing left to give another person. No energy for kindness, no space for connection, no interest in anyone's problems but his own. And yet here he was. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe because you looked like you needed someone to be. You don't even know me. So? Does that matter? Mara's eyes, her beautiful, haunted eyes, searched his face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. People don't just help, not without wanting something. I don't want anything. Ethan leaned back in his chair, trying to look relaxed even though his heart was hammering. I've got 40 minutes before I have to pick up my daughter. Figured I'd spend it having coffee with someone instead of staring at the wall alone. You have a daughter? Sophie, she's 7. Without thinking, he pulled out his phone and showed her his lock screen. Sophie grinning, gap-toothed in front of the public library, her favorite place in the world. She's at a birthday party. I'm trying not to think about how much sugar she's probably consuming right now. A tiny smile ghosted across Mara's face, there and gone so fast he almost missed it. She's beautiful. She's a terror, Ethan said fondly. But yeah, she's pretty great. Mara's expression shifted, something wistful and sad. You're lucky. Some days I feel lucky. Other days I feel like I'm drowning. The honesty surprised him. He didn't talk about this with anyone. But I guess that's just life, right? You do what you have to do. The barista appeared at their table, setting down 2 menus with exaggerated care, like he was afraid to get too close. He didn't make eye contact with Mara, just mumbled, "I'll be back in a minute," and retreated. Mara watched him go, her brief moment of ease evaporating. See? Even when they're trying to be polite, they can't stand to look at me. Then they're idiots. Ethan pushed one of the menus toward her. Their loss. You say that like you believe it. I do believe it. He met her eyes steadily. Whatever happened to you, it doesn't make you less. It just makes you someone who survived something terrible. Mara's hands tightened on the menu until her knuckles went white. You don't know what you're talking about. Maybe not, but I know what it's like when people write you off before you even open your mouth. Ethan gestured at his stained jacket, his worn-out clothes, the exhaustion probably carved into every line of his face. Single dad, construction worker, community college dropout. I see it in their eyes all the time. They've already decided who I am and what I'm worth. That's not the same. No, he agreed quietly. It's not. What you deal with is worse. I can at least hide behind normal enough looks. You can't hide, and I'm sorry for that. But it doesn't change the fact that their judgment says more about them than it does about you. Mara stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she opened the menu. It was such a small thing, such a simple gesture, but Ethan felt it like a victory. They ordered tea for her, another coffee for him that he probably wouldn't drink. The barista took their orders with clipped efficiency and disappeared again. Around them, the cafe's normal rhythm was slowly reasserting itself. Conversations resumed, though at lower volumes. People went back to their laptops and phones, though more than a few kept glancing over. How long has it been? Ethan asked. Since you went out somewhere like this? Mara's fingers traced the rim of her water glass. 3 years. Almost 4. Jesus. My father... She stopped, started again. He thinks it's safer if I stay home. And he's right, usually. Today was... I don't know what I was thinking. You were thinking you deserved to live your life. I was thinking I was tired of being alone. The admission seemed to cost her. But I was stupid. Look what happened. What happened? Ethan challenged gently. You walked into a cafe. Some people were rude. And now you're sitting here having tea. Seems like a win to me. You're deliberately missing the point. Maybe, or maybe you're so used to seeing yourself through their eyes that you've forgotten what it feels like to just exist as yourself without apologizing for it. Mara's laugh was sharp and humorless. Easy for you to say. Is it? Ethan leaned forward slightly. You think I don't know what it's like to feel like I'm failing at basic existence? My wife left because I couldn't provide the life she wanted. I work 60-hour weeks and still can't afford to fix the leak in our bathroom. My daughter asks me questions I don't have answers to, and half the time I'm making it up as I go, hoping I don't screw her up too badly. He paused, the words coming from somewhere deep and honest. We're all just doing our best with broken pieces, Mara. Some of our breaks just show on the outside. She was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those storm cloud eyes. When did it happen? Your wife leaving? 2 years ago. Sophie was 5. Old enough to notice, young enough that I couldn't really explain. The familiar ache settled in his chest. She asked me for months when Mommy was coming home. Eventually, she stopped asking. I'm sorry. Don't be. We're better off. He said it like a mantra, something he'd repeated so often he almost believed it. Just me and Sophie now. We make it work. It sounds lonely. It is. The admission surprised him again. But lonely is better than being with someone who makes you feel worthless. Mara's expression shifted. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. Yes, she said softly. Yes, it is. The barista returned with their drinks, setting them down with the same careful distance. Mara thanked him quietly, and he nodded without meeting her eyes before hurrying away again. She wrapped her hands around the teacup, savoring the warmth. Do you know what the worst part is? Tell me. I used to be someone. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Before the accident, I had friends, plans, a life. I was going to travel after college. I wanted to study architecture in Italy. I had this whole future mapped out. She stared into her tea like it held answers. And then one night, everything just ended. Ethan waited, letting the silence stretch. He'd learned with Sophie that sometimes people needed space to find their words. Fire, Mara continued eventually. There was a fire. And She stopped, swallowed hard. I don't want to talk about it. Okay. She looked up, surprised. That's it? You're not going to push? Why would I? You'll talk about it if you want to, or you won't. Either way is fine. Most people press. They want the gory details, the drama. I'm not most people. Ethan took a sip of his coffee, grimacing at how bitter it had gotten. And your trauma isn't entertainment. Something in Mara's face cracked. Just a little, just enough. Her eyes went bright with unshed tears and she blinked rapidly, fighting them back. I don't understand you. What's to understand? I'm just a guy having coffee. You're not just anything. Her voice was thick with emotion. You're sitting here with me when everyone else in this room would rather pretend I don't exist. You're treating me like I'm normal when we both know I'm not. She broke off, shaking her head. I don't know what you are, but you're not just a guy. Ethan felt heat rise to his face. Compliments made him uncomfortable. They always had, even before his life fell apart. I'm really not that special, Mara. I just think everyone deserves basic human decency. That's a pretty low bar. You'd be surprised how many people can't clear it. They sat in silence for a while, sipping their drinks. The cafe's afternoon crowd was thinning out. A few people had left, probably uncomfortable with the situation. A few new customers had arrived, done double takes at Mara, and either stayed or left depending on their personal tolerance for discomfort. Ethan checked his phone. 20 minutes until Sophie's pickup. I should probably go soon, he said reluctantly. Birthday party duty calls. Disappointment flashed across Mara's face, quickly hidden. Of course, I've taken up enough of your time. That's not what I meant. Ethan hesitated, then made a decision that probably wasn't smart, but felt right anyway. Would you want to do this again? Maybe next week? Mara stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. What? Coffee or tea, whatever, same time, same place. He rushed on before he could second-guess himself. Only if you want to, no pressure. I just thought, I don't have a lot of friends, and you seem like you could use one, so maybe, why? The single word cut through his rambling. Ethan took a breath, considering his answer. Honestly? Because talking to you is the first time in 2 years I've felt like myself, the real me. Not the exhausted dad version or the struggling worker version. Just me. He shrugged. And I think maybe you felt it too. This easiness. This sense of being able to say true things without being judged for them. Mara's hands trembled around her teacup. You can't possibly want to be seen with me again. Not after this. Not after you've seen how people react. I told you, I don't care what people think. You should care. You have a daughter. Being associated with someone like me, it could affect her. Other parents can mind their business. Ethan's voice was firm. Sophie doesn't need people in her life who would judge her based on who her dad has coffee with. And honestly, if that's how they think, I don't want them around her anyway. You're naive. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of letting fear make my decisions. He pulled out his phone again. What's your number? Ethan? Just think about it. You don't have to decide right now. He slid his phone across the table. But if you want to talk, or get coffee, or just have someone who won't treat you like you're invisible, I'm here, okay? Mara looked at the phone for a long moment. Then, hands shaking, she picked it up and typed in her number. When she handed it back, her eyes were bright with tears again. I don't understand you, she repeated. But thank you. For today. For not running. Nothing to thank me for. Ethan stood, pulling on his stained jacket. I got exactly what I needed out of this, too. Which was? He smiled, a real smile this time, the kind he hadn't worn in months. A reminder that there are still good people in the world, that kindness still matters, that maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. He grabbed his keys. Take care, Mara. And think about next week. He was halfway to the door when her voice stopped him. Ethan? He turned back. Mara had stood up, one hand gripping the table for support. Her scarf had slipped down, and she wasn't pulling it back up. For the first time since she'd walked in, she was letting people see her fully. Same time next week, she said clearly, loud enough that several people heard. I'll be here. The smile that broke across Ethan's face felt like sunshine after a long winter. It's a date. He left the cafe feeling lighter than he had in years, barely noticing the cold. Behind him, Mara Ellison sat back down, wrapped her hands around her cooling tea, and for the first time in almost 4 years, allowed herself to hope. Neither of them noticed the man in the expensive suit watching from across the street, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression dark with fury. Neither of them knew that their simple act of kindness had just set in motion a chain of events that would test everything they thought they knew about courage, sacrifice, and what it truly means to choose someone when the whole world says you shouldn't. But they would learn. They would both learn. The man in the expensive suit was named Richard Ellison, and he was not accustomed to being disobeyed. He stood in his penthouse office 70 floors above the city, phone still warm in his hand from the call he'd just ended. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the world sprawled below him like a kingdom. Buildings he owned, businesses he controlled, lives he influenced with a single signature. But none of that mattered right now. All that mattered was what he'd just witnessed through those cafe windows. His daughter, his Mara, holding hands with some nobody in work boots. Sir? His assistant appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. The car is ready whenever you find out everything about him. Richard didn't turn from the window. The man my daughter was with. I want his full name, employment history, financial records, criminal background if he has one. I want to know what he had for breakfast. Yes, sir. How soon? An hour ago. Richard's voice was ice. Get started. The assistant disappeared. Richard finally turned from the window, his reflection ghosting across the glass. A man of 55 who looked 40, who'd built an empire through ruthless intelligence and the willingness to destroy anyone who got in his way. He'd protected Mara from the world's cruelty for 4 years. He wasn't about to let some construction worker undo everything. His phone buzzed, a text from his head of security. Target acquired. Ethan Brooks, 32, single father, works for Morrison Construction, current location, Riverside Elementary Pickup Zone. Richard's jaw tightened. A single father. Even worse. Probably looking for a meal ticket, someone to take care of his brat. Well, Richard Ellison didn't raise his daughter from the ashes of tragedy just to watch her be exploited by some opportunist. He grabbed his coat. Time to make things perfectly clear. 3 miles across town, Ethan sat in his truck outside Riverside Elementary, completely unaware that his life was about to become very complicated. He was still thinking about Mara, the way she'd looked when she finally smiled, the sound of her voice when she said she'd see him next week. It felt fragile and precious, like something he needed to protect but didn't quite know how. The school doors burst open and children poured out like a dam breaking. Ethan spotted Sophie immediately. She was hard to miss with her wild blonde curls and the bright purple backpack that was almost as big as she was. She was talking animatedly with another girl, hands gesturing wildly as she recounted some story. Then she saw his truck, and her whole face lit up. "Daddy!" She broke into a run, her friend forgotten. Ethan got out and caught her as she launched herself at him. "Daddy, you'll never believe what happened." There was a unicorn piñata, and Madison's mom made cupcakes that looked like actual rainbows, and we played this game where, "Whoa, slow down, firecracker!" Ethan laughed, swinging her around before setting her down. "How about you tell me in the truck? We need to get home and start dinner." "Can we have pancakes? For dinner?" "Why not? You always say breakfast food is good any time of day." "I say that about eggs, not pancakes." "Eggs, pancakes, same thing." Sophie climbed into the truck, already buckling herself in with the efficiency of a child who'd been doing it for years. "Pancakes are basically eggs and flour mixed together anyway." Ethan couldn't argue with that logic. "Fine, pancakes it is, but you're helping." "Deal." Sophie was practically vibrating with sugar-fueled energy. "Oh, and Daddy, can I tell you something?" "Always, baby." "Madison said her mom won't let her come to our apartment anymore because it's in a bad neighborhood." Sophie made air quotes, her face scrunched with confusion. "What's a bad neighborhood?" "Our neighborhood has Mrs. Chen, who gives me cookies, and Mr. Martinez, who fixed my bike, and the library is right there." "That doesn't seem bad." Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This again, this endless judgment about where they lived, how much money they didn't have, whether he was good enough to be Sophie's father. "Madison's mom doesn't know what she's talking about, sweetheart. Our neighborhood is just fine." So she was being mean? Not mean exactly, just narrow-minded. What's that mean? It means she only sees the world one way and can't imagine it being different. Ethan glanced at his daughter in the rear-view mirror. "Some people think if you don't have a lot of money or live in a fancy house, there's something wrong with you, but that's not true. You know that, right?" Sophie nodded seriously. "You work really hard, Daddy, and we have everything we need." The simple faith in her voice made his chest ache. "That's right, baby. We do." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, Sophie humming some song from the party while Ethan navigated the late afternoon traffic. His phone sat in the cup holder, Mara's number saved under a simple M in his contacts. He'd already typed and deleted 3 different text messages. What was he supposed to say? "Thanks for the tea? Looking forward to next week?" Everything sounded stupid. He was still overthinking it when they pulled into their apartment complex, an aging building in a neighborhood that wasn't dangerous, just poor, the kind of place where people minded their own business and helped their neighbors when they could. Ethan had lived here for 18 months, ever since the divorce settlement left him with barely enough for first and last month's rent. They climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The elevator had been broken for a month. Ethan made a mental note to ask the super about it again, knowing it probably wouldn't matter. The building's owner lived in Florida and hadn't visited in years. "Daddy, can I play outside after pancakes?" Sophie was already unlocking their door with her own key, another thing she'd learned too young. "It'll be dark soon, maybe tomorrow." "But tomorrow's Sunday. We could go to the park." "We'll see." Ethan pushed open the door and stopped cold. A woman stood in their living room. She was maybe 40, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she held a leather folder in her perfectly manicured hands. She smiled at Sophie with the kind of professional warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Catherine Walsh from Child Protective Services." The world tilted. Ethan felt Sophie's hand slip into his, her small fingers gripping tight. "How did you get in here?" His voice came out rough. "The building manager let me in. I apologize for the intrusion, but I needed to conduct a home visit." "A home visit?" Ethan's mind raced. "Based on what?" "I haven't received any notice. We received a complaint this afternoon regarding Sophie's living conditions. Catherine's smile never wavered. I'm required to investigate all complaints, Mr. Brooks. I'm sure you understand. I understand someone is lying. Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself between this woman and his daughter. My daughter is healthy, happy, and well cared for. Who made this complaint? I'm not at liberty to say. Catherine glanced around the apartment, taking in the worn furniture, the water stain on the ceiling from the bathroom leak, the pile of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter that Ethan hadn't had time to file away. I'll need to ask you some questions. Daddy? Sophie's voice was small and scared. Ethan squeezed her hand. It's okay, baby. Why don't you go to your room and get started on your homework? But we were going to make pancakes. We will, I promise. Just give me a few minutes to talk to Miss Walsh. Sophie looked between them with the two wise eyes of a child who'd seen her world upended before. She didn't argue, just slipped away to her tiny bedroom and quietly closed the door. The moment she was gone, Ethan turned on Catherine with barely controlled fury. You scared my daughter. That wasn't my intention. I don't care about your intentions. You broke into my home without warning. The door was unlocked. That's a lie. Catherine's professional mask cracked slightly. Mr. Brooks, I understand you're upset, but I'm just doing my job. Now, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice. Ethan forced himself to take a breath. Losing his temper would only make things worse. What do you want to know? How long have you lived here? 18 months. And you work for Morrison Construction? Yes. How many hours per week? Varies. Usually around 60. Catherine made a note. That's a lot of hours. Who watches Sophie when you're working? Mrs. Chen downstairs. She's a retired teacher. Sophie does her homework with her, helps her bake sometimes. Ethan crossed his arms. She's safe, supervised, and loved. Mrs. Chen has grandchildren of her own. I'll need to speak with Mrs. Chen. Fine. Anything else? Catherine walked slowly through the apartment, and Ethan watched helplessly as she cataloged every flaw, the crack in the living room wall, the ancient appliances, the second-hand everything. His shame burned hot and bitter. He worked himself to exhaustion, gave Sophie everything he could, and it still wasn't enough. The bathroom has a leak, Catherine observed, peering through the doorway. I know, I'm fixing it this weekend. Mold can be dangerous for children. There's no mold, just some water damage to the drywall. Catherine made another note. Ethan wanted to rip that folder out of her hands and throw it out the window. Mr. Brooks, I'm going to be frank with you. Catherine turned to face him. Your living conditions are marginal. Not unsafe, but certainly not ideal. Combined with your work hours and single-parent status, there are legitimate concerns about whether this environment is in Sophie's best interest. Marginal. The word tasted like acid. My daughter has food, shelter, clothing, medical care, and a father who loves her. What exactly is marginal about that? Stability, Mr. Brooks. Sophie needs stability. A consistent caregiver, a safe neighborhood, educational opportunities. She goes to a good school. She's in the gifted program. For now. But if your work situation changes, if you can't afford this apartment anymore, that's not going to happen. Can you guarantee that? Catherine's eyes were sharp. Can you honestly tell me that you'll never lose your job, never have a medical emergency, never face a situation where you can't provide for her? Ethan couldn't answer because they both knew he couldn't make that guarantee. Nobody could. Life was chaos and uncertainty, especially for people like him who lived one paycheck away from disaster. I didn't think so. Catherine closed her folder. I'm going to make my recommendation to the court that Sophie remains in your care for now, but with regular check-ins. We'll be monitoring the situation closely. If anything changes, if there's any indication that Sophie isn't being properly cared for, we will take action. Do you understand? Perfectly. Good. Catherine headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Mr. Brooks, I can see you're trying, but sometimes trying isn't enough. Sometimes children need more than love. They need resources, security, things a single father working construction can't always provide. She left, and Ethan stood in the middle of his marginal apartment, shaking with rage and fear and the terrible certainty that this wasn't over. Sophie emerged from her room, her eyes red. "Is the lady gone?" "Yeah, baby, she's gone." "Is she going to take me away?" "No." Ethan pulled her into his arms. "Never. I promise you, Sophie. Nobody is taking you anywhere." It was a promise he had no idea how he'd keep. 2 hours later, after pancakes that neither of them had much appetite for and a bedtime routine that felt brittle with unspoken fears, Ethan finally pulled out his phone. He stared at Mara's number for a long time before typing a message. "Hey, it's Ethan from the cafe. I hope you're doing okay. Today got complicated on my end, but I'm still looking forward to next week if you are." He hit send before he could overthink it. Then he sat on his worn couch in his marginal apartment and tried not to think about Catherine Walsh's barely concealed contempt, or the complaint that had brought her there, or the fact that someone with resources and motivation had decided to make his life hell. His phone buzzed. A text from Mara. "I'm okay. Nervous about next week, but in a good way. I hope your complications weren't too serious." Ethan smiled despite everything. "Nothing I can't handle. Get some rest. I'll text you tomorrow." "I'd like that." He put his phone down and stared at the ceiling, at the water stain he'd been meaning to fix for months. Tomorrow he'd deal with everything, figure out who filed that complaint, make sure Sophie felt safe, maybe even call a lawyer friend who owed him a favor. Tomorrow he'd be strong and capable and everything a father needed to be. But tonight he let himself imagine a different life. One where he could take Mara to dinner without worrying about the cost. One where Sophie didn't have to grow up so fast. One where he wasn't always one disaster away from losing everything. It was a nice dream. It lasted almost 5 minutes before reality came crashing back. Across town, Mara sat in her bedroom in her father's mansion, staring at her phone. Her father hadn't come home yet, which was unusual for a Saturday. Usually he was there for dinner, watching her with those assessing eyes, making sure she ate enough, didn't push herself too hard, stayed safe in her gilded cage. But tonight the house was quiet except for the staff moving silently through their routines. Mara should have been relieved. Instead, she felt uneasy. Her phone rang. Her father. "Hello?" "Mara." His voice was controlled, but she heard the anger underneath. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About the man you met today, the construction worker." Mara's stomach dropped. "How do you—" "I have people who keep me informed about your safety." "Did you really think you could meet with a stranger and I wouldn't know?" "He's not a stranger. His name is Ethan, and he was kind to me. That's more than I can say for most people." "Kind." Her father laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mara, he's a single father struggling to make ends meet. Do you know what that means? It means he's looking for someone to take care of him, someone with money." "That's not true. He didn't even know who I was. He knew you were my daughter the moment you walked into that cafe. Everyone in this city knows who you are." "Nobody knows who I am anymore, Father. They just know what I look like. And Ethan didn't care about that." "Of course he didn't care. He cares about what you can give him. Money, security, a way out of his pathetic life." Richard's voice hardened. "I won't let you be used, Mara. I've protected you for 4 years, and I'm not stopping now." "Protected me?" Mara's voice rose. "You've imprisoned me. I haven't left this house in months. I have no friends, no life. Nothing but these 4 walls and your suffocating concern. I kept you safe. From what? From living?" Tears burned in Mara's eyes. "I went to one cafe, Father. I had 1 cup of tea. And for the first time since the accident, someone looked at me and saw a person instead of a tragedy. You can't take that away from me." Silence on the other end. Then quietly, "He has a daughter, Mara. A 7-year-old child. Today, Child Protective Services paid him a visit because someone filed a complaint about his living conditions. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" The blood drained from Mara's face. "You didn't. I protected my daughter, just like I always have." "You used a child as a weapon." Mara's hands shook. "You terrified a little girl because her father was nice to me. What kind of monster does that?" "The kind who loves his daughter enough to do whatever it takes." Richard's voice was steel. "Stay away from Ethan Brooks, Mara. This is your only warning. If you see him again, I'll make sure he loses everything. His job, his apartment, his daughter. I will destroy him, and it will be your fault." The line went dead. Mara sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, her father's words echoing in her mind. He'd threatened a child. Her father, who'd always been strict but never cruel, had weaponized the system against an innocent little girl just to keep Mara isolated. She looked at her last text exchange with Ethan. His message about complications made terrible sense now. He didn't know why CPS had shown up, probably thought it was random bad luck or a malicious neighbor. He had no idea her father had orchestrated the whole thing. She should text him, warn him, tell him to stay far away from her because knowing her was dangerous. But the thought of never seeing him again, of returning to her lonely existence with only her father's controlling love for company, was unbearable. Mara stood and walked to her window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably putting his daughter to bed, unaware that he'd been caught in the crosshairs of Richard Ellison's protective fury. Somewhere out there was a man who'd held her hand in front of strangers, who'd treated her like she mattered, who'd given her the first glimpse of hope she'd had in years. And she was supposed to give that up because her father said so. She thought about the accident, about the fire that had stolen her face and her future, about the guilt she'd carried for 4 years, the shame that had kept her locked away. Her father had fed that shame, nurtured it, used it to keep her dependent on him. But Ethan hadn't seen shame when he looked at her. He'd seen someone worth sitting with, worth knowing, worth choosing, even when everyone else looked away. Mara picked up her phone and typed a new message. "Ethan, there's something you need to know." She stared at it for a long moment, her finger hovering over send. Once she warned him about her father, once she revealed the danger she brought into his life, he'd be smart to run. Any rational person would. But maybe, just maybe, Ethan Brooks wasn't entirely rational. Maybe he was as desperate for connection as she was. Maybe he'd decide she was worth the risk, or maybe he'd do the sensible thing and cut all contact, and she'd spend the rest of her life wondering what could have been. Mara deleted the message. Then she typed a different one. "I'm still looking forward to next week. Sleep well." It was selfish. It was dangerous. It was probably the worst decision she could make. But for the first time in 4 years, Mara Ellison was making her own choice. And she chose hope over fear, connection over safety, the possibility of something real over the certainty of nothing. She sent the message and waited, her heart pounding, for his reply. It came 30 seconds later. "You too. Sweet dreams, Mara." She smiled, even as tears slipped down her cheeks, down both sides of her face, the scarred and the smooth alike. Her father wouldn't stop. She knew that. He'd escalate, threaten, use every resource at his disposal to separate them. But she also knew something he didn't. She was tired of being protected. She was ready to start living again, even if it meant getting hurt. Especially if it meant getting hurt. Because staying safe in her father's mansion, isolated from everyone and everything, had hurt her more deeply than any physical pain ever could, and she was done letting fear make her decisions. Next week, she'd meet Ethan at that cafe. She'd tell him the truth about her father, and then she'd let him decide if she was worth the chaos she brought with her. She suspected, hoped, that he might surprise them both. The week crawled by like a wounded thing. Ethan threw himself into work with an intensity that had his crew giving him worried looks. He stayed late every night, volunteering for overtime he desperately needed, trying not to think about the CPS visit or the court-ordered check-ins that now hung over his head like a guillotine. He texted Mara every evening, small exchanges about books she was reading, stories about Sophie's latest adventures, nothing deep but everything meaningful. Each message felt like a small rebellion against the chaos threatening to consume him. By Friday, he'd almost convinced himself that everything would be fine. The CPS visit was a fluke. Whoever filed that complaint had probably moved on. He and Mara would have their coffee tomorrow, maybe become actual friends, and life would continue in its messy, manageable way. Then his boss called him into the trailer. "Brooks, sit down." Tom Morrison was a decent man running a struggling company in an industry that chewed up small operations and spit them out. He looked older than his 50 years, and right now he looked miserable. "I need to talk to you about something." Ethan's stomach sank. "If this is about the overtime hours, it's not about hours." Tom rubbed his face. "I got a call yesterday. From Richard Ellison's people. The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. Richard Ellison, the real estate developer? The same. Apparently he owns the property we're currently working on, and several other properties we've bid on. Tom met Ethan's eyes. He made it very clear that if you continue working for me, Morrison Construction won't get another contract in this city. Ever. The room seemed to tilt. What? I don't know what you did to piss off one of the richest men in the state, Brooks, but he wants you gone, and he has the power to destroy my business to make that happen. Tom's voice was heavy with regret. I've got 12 other guys depending on their paychecks. I've got my own family to feed. I can't. You're firing me. I don't have a choice. Ethan stood up so fast his chair fell backward. I've worked for you for 3 years, Tom. 3 years of showing up early, staying late, doing every job you needed, and you're firing me because some billionaire made a phone call? I'm sorry. Tom actually looked it. I'll give you 2 weeks severance and a good reference. It's the best I can do. Your best isn't good enough. Ethan heard his voice rising but couldn't stop it. I have a daughter. I have rent due in 2 weeks. I have CPS breathing down my neck waiting for me to fail. And you're just giving up? I have to think about the other workers. Screw the other workers. What about me? Ethan slammed his hand on the desk. What about my kid? Tom stood up too, his own frustration finally showing. You think I want to do this? You think I slept last night? But Richard Ellison could buy and sell my company 10 times over. He could ruin me, Brooks, and I can't let that happen. They stared at each other across the desk, two men caught in a situation neither had created but both would suffer from. Finally, Ethan grabbed his jacket. Fine, I'll clear out my locker. Brooks, save it. Ethan walked out of the trailer into the cold afternoon, his hands shaking with rage and fear. Richard Ellison, Mara's father. It had to be. The timing was too perfect, too targeted. One coffee date, and the man was systematically destroying his life. His phone buzzed, a text from Mara. Still on for tomorrow? I found a great book I want to tell you about. Ethan stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the reply. He should cancel. Should tell her this wasn't worth it, that her father was right to keep them apart, that he couldn't afford to lose anything else. He had Sophie to think about, his job, his future. But the thought of never seeing Mara again, of letting Richard Ellison's threats dictate his life, made something hot and defiant rise in his chest. He typed back, wouldn't miss it. Then he drove home to figure out how to tell Sophie that Daddy had lost his job. She took it better than he expected, which somehow made it worse. 7 years old and already too familiar with disappointment, with plans changing, with the world being unpredictable and unsafe. She patted his hand while he explained about needing to find new work, about maybe cutting back on some things for a while, about how it would all be okay, even though he wasn't sure it would. Will we have to move? She asked quietly. I don't know, baby. I hope not. Can I still go to my school? I'll do everything I can to make sure you can. Sophie nodded, accepting this the way children accept all the chaos adults create. Okay, Daddy, we'll figure it out together. Her faith in him was a weight he didn't know how to carry. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with a beer he couldn't really afford and tried to make sense of his options. He could find another construction job, but Richard Ellison's reach was long. He could try a different industry entirely, but that would mean starting over at entry-level wages. He could move to a different city, but that would mean tearing Sophie away from everything familiar. Or he could fight back. The thought was absurd. He was a single father with a high school diploma fighting against a billionaire with unlimited resources and zero conscience. It wasn't even a fair fight. It was a massacre waiting to happen. But then he thought about Mara's face when she'd smiled at him, about the way she'd looked when she said she'd be there tomorrow, about a woman who'd been locked away for 4 years by a father who loved her so much he'd suffocated her. Ethan pulled out his phone and Googled Richard Ellison. The man stared back at him from dozens of articles, groundbreaking ceremonies, charity galas, business deals worth millions. In every photo, Richard looked powerful and untouchable, the kind of man who'd never known failure because he had enough money to make it impossible. There were older photos, too, from before, showing a younger Richard with his wife and daughter at various events. Mara had been stunning, confident smile, easy grace, the kind of natural beauty that didn't need enhancement. Then Ethan found the articles about the fire. 4 years ago. A house party in the Ellisons' vacation home. Someone knocked over a candle. The curtains caught. By the time anyone noticed, the room was engulfed. Mara had been trapped. Her mother had run in to save her. Only one of them came out alive. Mara's mother had died in that fire, and Mara had survived with burns covering 30% of her body. Ethan sat back, the pieces suddenly clicking together. Richard hadn't just lost his wife. He'd almost lost his daughter, too. And now he kept her locked away, convinced the world was too dangerous, too cruel, too ready to hurt her again. It didn't excuse the man's actions, but it explained them. Ethan's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Brooks?" A woman's voice, cultured and cold. "This is Amanda Chen from Riverside Elementary. I'm calling to inform you that we've received some concerning reports about Sophie's home environment." Not again. What kind of reports? Reports suggesting that Sophie may not be receiving adequate care. We're required to investigate all such claims, and I wanted to schedule a time for you to come in and discuss this with myself and our school counselor. Who made these reports? But Ethan already knew. I'm not at liberty to say. However, I can tell you that they come from a credible source with legitimate concerns about Sophie's welfare. A credible source with a mansion and unlimited money for lawyers. This is harassment. Mr. Brooks, I understand you're upset, but these are serious allegations. If you refuse to cooperate with our investigation, we'll have no choice but to escalate this to the appropriate authorities. Ethan closed his eyes. They had him trapped. Fight back and risk losing Sophie. Stay quiet and let Richard Ellison destroy him piece by piece. When do you want me to come in? Monday morning, 9 o'clock. I'll be there. He hung up before she could say anything else. The beer was empty. Ethan wanted another one, but couldn't afford the luxury of being hung over tomorrow. Tomorrow, when he'd see Mara and have to decide whether to tell her that knowing him was destroying his life, whether to ask her if she was worth losing everything for. He already knew the answer. He just wasn't sure if he was brave enough to accept it. Morning came too bright and too cold. Ethan dressed carefully, his cleanest jeans, a button-down shirt he usually saved for parent-teacher conferences, his only jacket that didn't have paint stains. He wanted to look like someone Richard Ellison couldn't dismiss as beneath his daughter. It was probably futile, but he tried anyway. Sophie was staying with Mrs. Chen for the afternoon. The older woman had hugged Ethan when he dropped Sophie off, her eyes knowing and sad. "Be careful," she'd whispered. "Rich people, they play different games than us." Now Ethan sat in Miller's coffee house at their usual table, 10 minutes early, his hands wrapped around coffee he couldn't taste. The cafe was more crowded than last week. Saturday afternoon rush, people with laptops and books and conversations about things that probably didn't include losing their jobs or fighting billionaires. The door chimed. Mara stepped inside, and this time she didn't pause. Didn't hesitate. She walked straight to his table with her head up, her scarf pulled down, letting everyone see her scars. A few people still stared, but she ignored them. Her eyes were only for Ethan. "Hi," she said, slipping into the chair across from him. "Hi yourself?" Ethan managed a smile. "You look good." "Liar." But she smiled back. "I look like I always look. You just see me differently." Maybe that's the same thing. They ordered tea for her, more coffee for him, and sat in the familiar silence of people who were still learning each other. Ethan knew he should tell her about the job, about the school, about everything. But looking at her face, seeing the hope and nervousness there, he couldn't bring himself to destroy it. Not yet. "Tell me about this book," he said instead. Mara's whole expression brightened. "Oh, it's about this woman who—" She stopped suddenly, her gaze fixed on something behind Ethan. The color drained from her face. "No." Ethan turned. Richard Ellison stood in the cafe entrance, flanked by two men in expensive suits who could only be lawyers or bodyguards. Maybe both. His eyes were locked on his daughter, and the fury there was barely controlled. "Mara," Richard said, his voice cutting through the cafe's chatter like a blade. "It's time to go home." Conversation stopped. Everyone turned to watch the drama unfold. Mara stood up, her hands trembling. I'm not going anywhere. Yes, you are. Richard walked toward their table, his expensive shoes clicking on the hardwood floor. You've made your point. You got your little rebellion. Now it's over. This isn't rebellion, Father. This is my life. Your life? Richard's laugh was sharp. You don't have a life, Mara. You have the safety and security I provide. You have the protection I've given you for 4 years, and you're throwing it away for... He glanced at Ethan with undisguised contempt. For this? Ethan stood up slowly, putting himself between Richard and Mara. Mr. Ellison, I think you should leave. You think? Richard stepped closer, and Ethan could smell expensive cologne and barely restrained violence. You think you have any say in this? Do you have any idea who I am? I know exactly who you are. Ethan's voice was steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. You're a man who's so scared of losing his daughter that you'd destroy anyone who gets close to her. You're a father who loves so hard it's become control. Don't you dare! You got me fired. Ethan felt Mara's sharp intake of breath behind him. You called CPS on me. You're going after my daughter's school. All because I had coffee with Mara. All because I treated her like a human being instead of a tragedy. Richard's expression was stone. I protected my daughter from someone who would use her. Use her? Ethan's voice rose. I don't want anything from her except her company. I don't care about your money. I don't care about your connections. He stopped, the truth suddenly clear. I just care about her, as a person, as someone worth knowing. How touching. Richard's smile was cruel, and how convenient that the struggling single father just happens to care about the scarred heiress. I'm sure her trust fund has nothing to do with it. Mara pushed past Ethan. Stop it. Both of you. Just stop. Her voice shook but held. Father, Ethan didn't know who I was when we met. He didn't know about you or the money or anything. He just saw someone who needed kindness and gave it. That's all. Mara, no, you've controlled my life for 4 years. You've kept me locked away like I'm made of glass. You've convinced me that the world is too dangerous, too cruel, that I need to hide forever. Tears were streaming down her face now, tracking down both the scarred and smooth skin. But you're wrong. The world isn't cruel. You are. You're the one who's hurt me most, and you did it while claiming to love me. Richard looked like she'd slapped him. Everything I've done has been to protect you. From what? From living? From feeling? From ever being happy again? Mara's voice broke. Mom wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want you to keep me in a cage. Don't. Richard's voice went deadly quiet. Don't talk about your mother. Why not? Because it hurts? Because remembering that she died trying to save me is painful? Mara was shaking now, years of suppressed grief and anger pouring out. I think about her every day, Father, every single day. And you know what I think. I think she'd be ashamed of what you've become, of what you've turned me into. The cafe was absolutely silent. Even the espresso machine had stopped hissing. Richard's face had gone pale. Mara, please. Let's go home and discuss this privately. No. Mara grabbed Ethan's hand, the same public gesture that had started everything a week ago. I'm staying with Ethan, and you can't stop me. Actually, I can. Richard pulled out his phone. One call and Child Protective Services will remove his daughter from his home. One call, and he'll never work in this city again. One call, and everything he has will be gone. He looked at Ethan. Is she worth it? Is one coffee date worth losing your child? The question hung in the air like poison. Ethan felt Mara's hand tighten on his, felt her whole body trembling against him. He thought about Sophie, about the school meeting Monday, about bills and rent and survival. He thought about how easy it would be to just walk away, to let Richard win, to go back to his small, struggling life. Then he thought about the look in Mara's eyes when she smiled, about the way she'd walked into this cafe with her head up, about a woman who was choosing courage over fear for the first time in 4 years. Yes, Ethan said simply, she's worth it. Richard's expression darkened. You're a fool. Maybe, but I'm a fool who knows the difference between love and possession. Ethan kept his eyes steady on Richard's. You don't get to control who your daughter cares about. You don't get to threaten people into submission just because you're scared of losing her. And you definitely don't get to use a 7-year-old child as a weapon. That child is better off away from a father who makes such poor decisions. That child is loved and safe and happy. Ethan's voice was steel now. And if you try to take her from me, I will fight you with everything I have. I may not have your money or your power, but I have the truth. I have the fact that I'm a good father doing his best, and I'll make sure every court, every judge, every social worker knows exactly what you've done. Empty threats from a desperate man. Try me. They stood locked in a silent battle of wills while the entire cafe watched. Finally, Richard turned to his daughter. Mara, I'm asking you one last time. Come home with me now, and I'll make this all go away. I'll leave Ethan Brooks alone. I'll stop the investigations. Everything goes back to normal. Nothing about my life has been normal since the fire. Mara's voice was steady now. Tears dried on her cheeks. And I don't want it to go back. I want to move forward, with or without your permission. If you stay with him, you're on your own. No more allowance, no more trust fund access, no more mansion. I'll cut you off completely. Fine. The single word seemed to break something in Richard. His composure cracked, and for just a moment Ethan saw the grief underneath. A father who'd lost his wife and was terrified of losing his daughter too. Who'd turned love into control because he didn't know any other way to keep her safe. Mara, Richard said quietly, please. I love you, Father. Mara's voice was gentle but firm. But I can't live in your cage anymore. I can't be the broken thing you keep in a glass case. I need to be whole again, and I can't do that hiding from the world. Richard stood frozen for a long moment. Then he turned to Ethan, and the grief was gone, replaced by cold calculation. You've made your choice, Mr. Brooks. Now live with the consequences. He walked toward the door, his lawyers following. At the threshold, he paused. Mara, when you're tired of playing at poverty, when you're ready to come home, the door will be open, but don't wait too long. I won't beg twice. Then he was gone, taking his threats and his power and his suffocating love with him. The cafe erupted in whispers. Mara collapsed into her chair, shaking so hard Ethan thought she might fall apart. He sat beside her and pulled her against him, and she buried her face in his shoulder and sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that sounded like 4 years of pain finally finding release. I'm so sorry, she gasped between sobs. I'm so sorry he went after Sophie. I didn't know he would. I should have warned you. Shh. It's okay. It's not okay. You lost your job because of me. Your daughter is in danger because of me. Everything that's happening is my fault. Ethan pulled back enough to look at her face. Listen to me. None of this is your fault. Your father made these choices, not you. He's the one who decided to weaponize his power. And yeah, it sucks. It's going to make everything harder, but that doesn't mean you're to blame. How can you say that? How can you not hate me? Because you're not your father. Ethan wiped tears from her cheeks, careful around the scar tissue. You're the woman who walked in here scared and left brave. You're someone who's choosing her own life for the first time in years, and I'm honored to be part of that, even if it costs me. Mara searched his face like she was looking for lies. You really mean that? Yeah, I really do. She kissed him then, sudden and desperate and tasting like salt tears. Ethan froze for half a second before kissing her back, his hand coming up to cup her face. The cafe around them disappeared. The watching crowd, the whispers, the judgment, none of it mattered. Just this moment, just this connection. When they finally pulled apart, Mara was smiling through her tears. What do we do now? Ethan laughed, the sound surprising him. Honestly, I have no idea. I'm unemployed, probably about to lose custody of my daughter, and I just made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the state. I'm pretty much screwed. We're screwed, Mara corrected. I just got disowned. I have maybe $300 in my purse and nowhere to live. Well then. Ethan stood and offered his hand. Want to go be screwed together? Mara took his hand without hesitation. More than anything. They walked out of Miller's coffee house hand in hand while the entire cafe watched. Someone started clapping, slow at first, then building. By the time they reached the door, half the room was applauding. It wouldn't pay Ethan's rent or get his job back or stop Richard Ellison's vendetta, but it was something. A reminder that not everyone in the world was cruel, that sometimes people recognized courage when they saw it. Outside, the afternoon had turned gray and cold. Ethan's truck was parked 3 blocks away. They walked slowly, neither wanting to let go of the other's hand. "I need to pick up Sophie soon," Ethan said. "You should probably come with me. Mrs. Chen will want to know what happened." "Will Sophie be okay with me being there?" "Sophie will love you." Ethan squeezed her hand. "Fair warning, though, she asks about 1,000,000 questions and has zero filter." "I can handle questions." Mara paused. "Ethan, what your father said about fighting him with everything you have, did you mean it?" "Every word." "Good. Because I'm going to fight too." Her jaw set with determination. "I'm going to testify against him if it comes to that. I'll tell every judge and social worker that you're a good father, that Sophie is safe with you, that everything he's done has been manipulation and control. That will destroy your relationship with him." "Maybe it's already destroyed." Mara's voice was sad but clear. "Maybe it's been destroyed since the fire and we've both just been pretending. Either way, I'm done letting him hurt people I care about." They reached the truck. Ethan unlocked it, but didn't get in yet. "Mara, I need you to understand something. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Your father isn't going to give up. He'll escalate. He'll use every weapon he has. And I can't promise I'll be able to protect you from the fallout." "I don't need you to protect me." Mara met his eyes steadily. "I need you to stand beside me while I learn to protect myself. Can you do that?" Ethan thought about Sophie, about the bills, about everything that was about to come crashing down. He thought about the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice that would minimize damage and maybe, possibly, let him keep his daughter. Then he thought about Mara's hand in his, about the way she'd stood up to her father, about courage and hope and the kind of love that didn't demand possession. "Yeah," he said, "I can do that." They got in the truck and drove toward Mrs. Chen's apartment, toward Sophie, toward a future that was uncertain and terrifying and absolutely not guaranteed to work out. But they drove toward it together, and somehow that made all the difference. Behind them, unseen and unnoticed, a photographer stepped out from behind a building and lowered his camera. He scrolled through the images he'd just captured: the kiss in the cafe, the hand-holding on the street, the intimate conversation by the truck. Perfect shots. Exactly what Richard Ellison had paid him to get. He sent the photos with a brief message. "Got everything you needed. What do you want me to do with them?" The reply came seconds later. "Send them to every news outlet in the city. Let's see how brave they are when the whole world is watching." The photographer hesitated for just a moment, looking at the images of 2 people who clearly cared about each other, who'd chosen courage over comfort. Then he shrugged and started making calls. He was being paid too well to have a conscience. By nightfall, Ethan Brooks and Mara Ellison would be headline news. The struggling single father and the disfigured heiress, a human interest story, a scandal. A Romeo and Juliet narrative that the media would devour and distort until the truth was buried under sensationalism. But that was later. For now, they had a few more hours of peace, a few more hours of not knowing what was coming. And they spent those hours with Sophie, who took one look at Mara and said, "Wow, what happened to your face?" With the blunt honesty of children everywhere, Mara had smiled, really smiled, and said, "I was in a fire, pretty scary, huh?" And Sophie, after careful consideration, had replied, "My daddy says scars just mean you survived something hard, so I think they're cool." It was the moment Ethan fell completely, irreversibly in love. It was the moment Mara realized she might actually survive this after all. And it was the last moment of peace they'd have for a very long time. The storm broke at dawn. Ethan woke to his phone vibrating so violently it fell off the nightstand. He grabbed it groggily, expecting a work call before remembering he didn't have work anymore. The screen showed 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and notifications from social media apps he rarely used. His stomach dropped. The first message was from his friend Jake. "Dude, are you seeing this? You're all over the news." Ethan opened his browser and immediately wished he hadn't. The headline screamed from every local news site. "Scarred heiress finds love with struggling father." Richard Ellison's daughter defies billionaire dad for construction worker. From tragedy to romance. Mara Ellison's secret relationship. The photos were everywhere. Him and Mara kissing in the cafe, holding hands on the street, talking by his truck. Private moments turned into public spectacle. Worse were the comments. Thousands of them. People he'd never met dissecting his life, his choices, his worth as a human being. Half called him a gold digger exploiting a vulnerable woman. The other half praised him as a hero saving the tragic heiress. Both sides were wrong, and both made him feel sick. His phone rang. Mrs. Chen. Ethan, there are reporters outside the building. They're asking about you and Sophie. I'm not letting anyone up, but you should know. Jesus. Ethan ran his hand through his hair. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Chen. I never meant for this to... I know, mijo, but you need to be careful. These people, they don't care about truth. They care about story. After she hung up, Ethan checked on Sophie. Still asleep, her blonde curls spread across the pillow, blissfully unaware that her face was now attached to articles analyzing her father's love life. He needed to keep her home today, needed to shield her from this circus as long as possible. He texted Mara, "You awake?" The response came immediately. "I haven't slept. Have you seen the news?" "Yeah, are you okay?" Define okay. My father's lawyer called at 5 a.m. Apparently I'm making the family look unstable, and he strongly suggests I issue a statement denying the relationship. Ethan's jaw clenched. What did you say? I told him where he could put his statement, then I blocked his number. Despite everything, Ethan smiled. That's my girl. Ethan, this is going to get worse. My father won't stop at photos. He'll dig into everything, your finances, your past, Sophie's mother. He'll find ammunition and use it. Let him dig. I've got nothing to hide. Everyone has something to hide. The words settled heavy between them. Ethan thought about his maxed-out credit cards, the child support payments he'd missed when work was slow, the night he'd gotten drunk after the divorce, and said things to his ex-wife he still regretted. Small failures, human mistakes, but in the hands of a skilled lawyer, they could be weapons. His phone rang again. Unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. Mr. Brooks, this is Jennifer Hayes from Channel 7 News. I'd love to get your side of the story about your relationship with Mara Ellison. We could do an exclusive interview, really let people see the real you. Ethan hung up. It rang again. Different number, different reporter, same predatory eagerness. He turned off his phone. The quiet that followed felt ominous rather than peaceful. He made coffee and sat at his kitchen table watching the sun rise over the city, trying to figure out how his life had turned into a media circus in less than 48 hours. 1 week ago, he'd been invisible, just another struggling dad in a city full of them. Now strangers across the country were debating whether he was a saint or a con artist. A knock at the door made him jump. He looked through the peephole and saw Mara standing in the hallway, wearing sunglasses and a hoodie pulled low over her face. He opened the door and she slipped inside quickly, glancing back at the stairs. Did anyone follow you? I don't think so. I left through the service entrance at my father's house and took 3 different buses. She pulled off her sunglasses and hood. Her eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. I needed to see you, to make sure you were okay. I'm fine. Ethan pulled her into a hug. Better now that you're here. She held on to him tightly, her whole body trembling. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. If I just stayed away from you like my father wanted, then we'd both still be miserable and alone. Ethan kissed the top of her head. I don't regret any of this, Mara. Not 1 second. Even though you lost your job, even though reporters are camped outside your building, even though... He pulled back to look at her. Do you regret it? Mara was quiet for a moment, really considering the question. No, she said finally. I regret that other people are getting hurt. I regret that Sophie has to deal with this. But choosing you, choosing myself, I don't regret that. From the bedroom, Sophie called out, Daddy, I heard voices. Stay here. Ethan went to check on his daughter. She was sitting up in bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes worried. Hey, Firecracker, how'd you sleep? Okay, who's here? Mara came to visit. Is that okay with you? Sophie's face brightened immediately. The lady with the cool scars? Yeah, Can she make pancakes with us? The casual acceptance, the complete lack of judgment, it made Ethan's throat tight. Sure, baby. Why don't you get dressed and come say hi? While Sophie was in the bathroom, Ethan returned to Mara. She wants you to make pancakes with us. I don't know how to make pancakes. Mara looked genuinely distressed. We always had a chef. I've never actually cooked anything. Then today's a good day to learn. They were in the middle of pancake chaos, flour on every surface, Sophie providing unhelpful but enthusiastic commentary, when Ethan's phone rang. He turned it back on to check for messages from his lawyer friend. Now he saw the caller ID, Riverside Elementary. His blood ran cold. I need to take this. He stepped into the bedroom. Hello? Mr. Brooks, this is Principal Anderson. I'm calling to inform you that we've decided it's best if Sophie stays home for a few days while this media situation calms down. You're suspending her? Not suspending. We're simply suggesting that given the current attention, it might be disruptive to have her in class. Parents are concerned that my daughter exists, that her father made the news? Ethan's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. She hasn't done anything wrong. No one is saying she has. But we have to think about the learning environment for all students. The reporters outside the school this morning, the phone calls we've been receiving, it's creating a distraction. So punish the kid because adults can't behave like adults. That's your solution? Mr. Brooks, I understand you're upset, but you have no idea how upset I am. Ethan's hand clenched the phone. Sophie loves that school. Her friends are there. And you're telling me she can't come because I committed the crime of being in a relationship that people find interesting? It's temporary, just until things settle down. And the meeting you scheduled with me for Monday about the concerns regarding Sophie's home life, is that temporary too? Principal Anderson's silence was answer enough. Right. Ethan's voice went flat. I'll keep Sophie home, but you should know that I'm documenting everything. Every call, every suspension, every bullshit excuse you give me. And when I prove that this is retaliation orchestrated by Richard Ellison, I'm coming after the school and anyone else who participated. He hung up before she could respond. When he returned to the kitchen, Mara took one look at his face and knew. What happened? They don't want Sophie at school, too disruptive. He sank into a chair. Everything's falling apart, Mara. My job, Sophie's school, our privacy, it's all just crumbling. Sophie appeared in the doorway, pancake batter on her cheek. Am I in trouble, Daddy? No, baby, you're not in trouble. Ethan forced a smile. But you get a few days off school. How about that? Because of the reporters? Sophie was too smart for her own good sometimes. Madison's mom texted you last night. I saw the notification. She said Madison can't play with me anymore because you're dating someone inappropriate. She stumbled over the big word. Mara's face went pale. Sophie, I'm not... It's okay. Sophie came over and patted Mara's hand. Madison's mom is mean anyway. She once told my daddy he should dress better for pickup because he represents the school community. But Daddy works hard and his clothes get dirty. That's not bad, it's just real life. The adult wisdom coming from a 7-year-old mouth would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking. Ethan pulled Sophie onto his lap. You're pretty smart, you know that? I know, Sophie grinned. Can we still make pancakes? They made pancakes. They ate them together at the small kitchen table while the world outside spun into chaos they couldn't control. For that hour, they pretended everything was normal, that they were just 3 people sharing breakfast, not the center of a media storm. Then Ethan's phone rang again. This time it was his lawyer friend, Marcus Webb. Ethan stepped into the bedroom again, leaving Mara and Sophie arguing about whether chocolate chips belonged in pancakes. Marcus, please tell me you have good news. I wish I did. Marcus's voice was grim. I've been looking into the CPS complaint and the school situation. Ethan, Richard Ellison has hired Blackstone Legal Group. They're the best and most ruthless family law firm in the state. They're building a case that you're an unfit parent. Based on what? Based on everything. Your income instability, your living conditions, the media attention that's now following Sophie everywhere. They're arguing that you're putting your relationship with Mara ahead of Sophie's well-being. That's insane. I'm doing everything for Sophie. I know that. You know that. But they're good at making normal struggles look like neglect. The missed child support payments when work was slow? They'll call that financial irresponsibility. The apartment leak you haven't fixed? Unsafe living conditions. The fact that Sophie stays with Mrs. Chen after school? Inadequate childcare. Ethan felt like he was drowning. What do I do? You fight. You document everything showing you're a good father. You get character witnesses. You prove that your relationship with Mara isn't affecting Sophie negatively. Actually, can you prove that? Ethan looked through the bedroom door at Mara and Sophie, who were now decorating a pancake to look like a face. Sophie was giggling and Mara was smiling, really smiling, the kind that reached her eyes. Yeah, he said quietly, I can prove that. Good, because we're going to need it. Ethan, I have to ask, is she worth this? Fighting Richard Ellison, potentially losing custody, all of it? It was the second time someone had asked him that question. This time, Ethan didn't even hesitate. She's worth it. Sophie's worth it. This whole thing, it's not just about romance, Marcus. It's about refusing to let a bully control our lives. It's about teaching Sophie that you stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Noble, expensive, potentially disastrous. Marcus sighed. But I'll help you. We'll need to schedule a custody evaluation, gather documentation, prepare for court. This is going to be a long fight. I'm ready. After the call ended, Ethan stood in his bedroom doorway, watching the two people who'd somehow become his whole world. Mara noticed him staring and raised an eyebrow in question. He just shook his head and mouthed, later. The moment of peace was shattered by a knock at the door, loud, authoritative, official. Through the peephole, Ethan saw two police officers. His heart stopped. He opened the door slowly. Can I help you? The older officer, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression, held up a badge. Mr. Brooks, I'm Officer Chen, no relation to your neighbor, and this is Officer Martinez. We need to speak with you about a complaint we received regarding a minor in this residence. Sophie's fine. She's right here. She's healthy. We still need to conduct a welfare check. It's procedure. The officer's tone was apologetic but firm. May we come in? Ethan had no choice. He stepped aside and let them enter. Sophie looked up from her pancake art and froze. Kids from their neighborhood learned young that police visits were rarely good news. Mara instinctively moved closer to Sophie, protective. Hi there. Officer Chen knelt down to Sophie's eye level. I'm Officer Chen. What's your name? Sophie. Her voice was small. That's a pretty name. Sophie, I need to ask you some questions, okay? You're not in trouble. We just want to make sure you're safe and happy. Over the next 20 minutes, Officer Chen talked to Sophie while Officer Martinez walked through the apartment, checking the bedrooms, the bathroom with its leaky pipe, the refrigerator contents, the safety of the windows. Ethan stood helplessly by while strangers evaluated his life and found it wanting. Do you ever feel unsafe here, Sophie? Officer Chen asked gently. No, my daddy takes care of me. Does he ever leave you alone? Sometimes I stay with Mrs. Chen when he's working. She makes good cookies. Has anyone ever hurt you, your dad or anyone else? Sophie's eyes went wide. My daddy would never hurt me. He's the best daddy in the whole world. The fierce loyalty in her voice made Ethan's eyes burn. After what felt like hours, but was probably 30 minutes, the officers conferred quietly. Then Officer Chen approached Ethan. Mr. Brooks, we're not seeing any evidence of abuse or neglect. Sophie appears healthy, well-fed, and bonded with you. However, she paused. We have to file a report noting the substandard living conditions and the ongoing media situation. That report will be available to CPS and any family court proceedings. Substandard. The word was a punch to the gut. I'm sorry. I know you're doing your best. Officer Chen's expression was genuinely sympathetic. But the leak, the cramped space, the neighborhood, on paper, it doesn't look good. My advice? Fix what you can, document everything, and get yourself a really good lawyer. After they left, Ethan sank onto the couch and put his head in his hands. Mara sat beside him, her hand on his back. They're going to take her, he said quietly. Richard Ellison is going to use every resource he has to prove I'm unfit, and he's going to win. No, Mara's voice was steel. He's not going to win. I won't let him. How are you going to stop him? He's your father. He controls your money, your access to everything. He controls what he thinks he controls. Mara stood up. But he doesn't control me anymore. And he doesn't control the truth about what happened the night of the fire. Ethan looked up. What do you mean? Mara's hands were shaking. The fire that scarred me. Everyone thinks it was an accident, a candle, some curtains, wrong place, wrong time. That's what my father told everyone. That's what I believed for 4 years. But it wasn't an accident? I don't know anymore. Mara's voice cracked. After the confrontation at the cafe, I started remembering things. Things I'd pushed down because they hurt too much. My mother and father fighting that night. Her saying she wanted a divorce. Him telling her she'd never leave him, never take me away from him. Ethan stood slowly. Mara, are you saying? I'm saying I remember my mother trying to leave the party, trying to take me with her, and my father blocking the door. Mara's breathing quickened. I remember him knocking over the candle when she tried to push past him. I remember the curtains catching and him just standing there, frozen, while my mother screamed at him to get help. Jesus. She ran into the flames to save me because he wouldn't. She died because he was too proud to let her leave, too controlling to imagine a world where he didn't get his way. Tears streamed down Mara's face. And after she died, he convinced me it was my fault, that I was too close to the curtains, that I should have been more careful. He made me believe I killed her. Sophie had been sitting very quietly, listening. Now she got up and hugged Mara tightly. You didn't kill anybody. Adults are supposed to protect kids, not the other way around. The simple truth from a child's mouth broke something open in Mara. She held Sophie and sobbed, years of false guilt finally releasing. Ethan's mind was racing. If you testify about what you remember, if there's any evidence that the fire wasn't just an accident, it changes everything. Mara pulled back from Sophie, wiping her eyes. My father built his reputation on being the grieving widower who cared for his damaged daughter. If the truth comes out that he caused my mother's death through his controlling behavior, that he's been gaslighting me about my own guilt, he'll be destroyed. And he'll do anything to prevent that from happening. Mara's expression hardened, which means we need to move first. Over the next hour, they planned. Mara would go to the police with her memories of that night. She'd request that they reopen the investigation into her mother's death. Ethan would gather every piece of documentation showing he was a good father, teacher reports, medical records, testimony from neighbors. They'd fight Richard Ellison not just in family court, but in the court of public opinion. It was risky, it was potentially futile, but it was something. By late afternoon, Mara left to meet with a police detective she'd contacted. Ethan spent the evening with Sophie, trying to make everything feel normal despite the reporters still camped outside their building. They played board games and watched a movie and pretended the world wasn't falling apart. At bedtime, Sophie hugged him extra tight. Daddy, are you and Mara going to get married? The question caught him off guard. I don't know, baby. We haven't really talked about that. But you love her. It wasn't a question. Ethan thought about lying, protecting Sophie from complications, but she deserved honesty. Yeah, firecracker. I think I do. Good. Sophie settled into her pillow. She needs someone to love her. Her daddy isn't very good at it. The wisdom of children, cutting straight to the heart of things. After Sophie was asleep, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Mara. Detective listened to everything. They're going to review the original fire investigation reports. It's not much, but it's a start. He texted back. It's more than we had this morning. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we keep fighting. Together? Together. Ethan set down his phone and walked to his window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Richard Ellison was plotting his next move. Somewhere, lawyers were building cases and reporters were writing stories, and systems were grinding forward with bureaucratic inevitability. But here, in this small apartment with its leaky bathroom and water-stained ceiling, Ethan had something Richard Ellison's money couldn't buy. The love of a daughter who believed in him and the respect of a woman who was learning to believe in herself. It would have to be enough, because it was all he had. The next morning brought a new development. Ethan woke to find a letter had been slipped under his door, expensive paper, elegant handwriting, sealed with actual wax. He opened it carefully. Mr. Brooks, I would like to meet with you, alone, today at 2 p.m. at the Harborview restaurant. This is not a threat or a trick. I simply wish to have a conversation, father to father. Please come. Richard Ellison. Ethan stared at the letter, trying to decide if it was a trap. Probably. Almost certainly. But the words father to father nagged at him. He texted Mara the details. Her response was immediate. Don't go. It's a setup. Maybe. But what if it's not? What if there's a chance to end this without destroying everyone? You're too optimistic. One of us has to be. At 1:30, Ethan left Sophie with Mrs. Chen and took 3 buses to make sure no reporters followed him. Harborview Restaurant was the kind of place that had waiters in suits and menus without prices. He felt immediately out of place in his clean but worn jeans and button-down shirt. Richard Ellison sat at a corner table, staring out at the water. He looked older than he had in the cafe, tired, maybe even sad. When he saw Ethan approach, he gestured to the seat across from him. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I'm here. Ethan sat down stiffly. Say what you need to say. Richard was quiet for a long moment, just looking at Ethan with those assessing eyes. Finally, he spoke. My daughter came to see me last night. She told me about her memories of the fire, about what she believes I did. Ethan's guard went up immediately. And I'm not going to confirm or deny her version of events. That's between Mara and me. Richard's voice was controlled but strained. What I will tell you is this. I love my daughter more than anything in this world. Everything I've done, every controlling decision, every overprotective measure has been to keep her safe. By destroying her life? By preserving it? Richard leaned forward. Do you have any idea what the world does to people like Mara? Beautiful women who become damaged? They're either pitied or fetishized, used, discarded. I wanted to protect her from that. So you locked her in a cage. I gave her safety. Richard's composure cracked slightly. And then you came along, with your working-class charm and your struggling single father story, and convinced her that the cage was the problem, not the world outside. The cage is the problem, Ethan said quietly. The world is cruel, yes, but Mara is strong enough to face it. You just never gave her the chance to prove it. Richard sat back, studying Ethan with something that might have been grudging respect. You really believe that? I know that. I've seen her courage. I've watched her choose herself over your money and security. That takes strength you can't learn hiding away. Or it takes foolishness, naivety, the kind of optimism that life hasn't beaten out of you yet. Richard's voice softened slightly. How old is your daughter? 7? And if someone threatened her safety, her future, what would you do? Ethan didn't hesitate. Anything. Everything. Exactly. Richard leaned forward again. So you understand. You understand what it is to love someone so much that you'd destroy anyone who hurt them, even if that someone is yourself. I understand love that's willing to fight, not love that controls and manipulates. They're the same thing when you have the resources I have. Richard pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. This is everything my lawyers have compiled on you, your financial struggles, your missed payments, the complaints against your parenting. With this information, I will win custody of my daughter's future. I will prove that associating with you is harmful to her recovery, and I will ensure that your daughter ends up in a more stable home. Ethan's hands clenched into fists under the table. Then why are we here? Why not just destroy me? Because Mara asked me not to. Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. Last night, when she told me about her memories, she also told me that if I hurt you or your daughter, she would never speak to me again, that she would testify against me in any investigation, that she would choose you over me, permanently. So this is you backing down? This is me offering a compromise. Richard pulled out a second folder. And here's a job offer, a position with one of my companies. Decent salary, good benefits, stable hours. Also a lease for a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. And a guarantee that all CPS complaints and school issues will disappear. Ethan stared at the folders, his salvation, laid out in expensive paper and legal terms. What's the catch? You end your relationship with Mara. cleanly, publicly. You tell the press it was a mistake, that you're incompatible, that you're focusing on your daughter. You move on with your improved life, and Mara comes home where she belongs. There it was, the devil's bargain. Ethan looked at Richard Ellison and saw desperation masked as control. Saw a man who'd lost his wife and was terrified of losing his daughter. Saw someone who loved so fiercely it had curdled into poison. No, Richard's expression didn't change. Think about your daughter. I am thinking about her. I'm thinking about what kind of man I want to be in her eyes, what kind of lessons I want to teach her. Ethan pushed both folders back across the table. I won't teach her that love can be bought or sold, that you abandon people when things get hard, that powerful men get to dictate who you care about. You're choosing pride over your child's well-being. I'm choosing integrity. Sophie deserves a father who keeps his promises and stands by the people he loves, even when it costs him. Ethan stood up. You want Mara to come home? Then be the kind of father she wants to come home to. Let her make her own choices. Trust that you raised her strong enough to handle the consequences. And if I don't? If I follow through with everything I've threatened? Ethan leaned on the table, meeting Richard's eyes directly. Then you'll win some battles and lose the war. You might get Mara back in your house, but you'll lose her heart. You might destroy my career, but you'll prove to Sophie that bullies always win. And you'll spend the rest of your life knowing you sacrificed your daughter's happiness for your need to control her. He walked away before Richard could respond, his heart pounding, his hands shaking. He'd just refused a lifeline, refused stability and safety and everything Sophie needed, but he'd kept his soul. Outside, Ethan pulled out his phone and texted Mara. Met with your father, turned down his offer. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Her response came quickly. What was the offer? Everything I need in exchange for you. I said no. Ethan, no. I said no, Mara. You're not for sale. We're not for sale. Whatever happens next, we face it together. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the stupidest. Probably both. Both. I'll take Sophie to the park. Want to join us? More than anything. An hour later, they sat on a park bench while Sophie played on the swings, laughing with other children who didn't care about scars or scandals or media attention. Just kids being kids, finding joy in the simple motion of flight. Mara leaned against Ethan's shoulder. He's not going to stop. I know. This is going to be ugly. Court battles, investigations, reporters digging into everything. I know that too. But you're still here. Where else would I be? Mara was quiet for a moment, watching Sophie swing higher and higher, her blonde curls flying. Do you believe in fate? That some things are meant to happen? I believe in choices, and I choose you every single time. She turned to look at him, her scarred and smooth skin both beautiful in the afternoon light. Even if it costs you everything? You are everything, Ethan said simply. You and Sophie. That's all that matters. Mara kissed him there in the park, in front of dog walkers and joggers, and probably some photographer hiding in the trees. Let them take pictures. Let them write their stories. This moment, this choice, was theirs. When they pulled apart, Sophie was standing in front of them with her hands on her hips. Are you guys going to get married or what? Because if you are, I want to be the flower girl, and I want a purple dress. Mara laughed through tears. I think that can be arranged. Good. Sophie climbed onto the bench between them. Can we get ice cream now? They got ice cream. They walked through the park like a family, ignoring the stares and the pointing and the comments. They chose joy in the midst of chaos, love in the face of opposition. And somewhere across the city, Richard Ellison sat alone in his mansion, staring at the folders he'd brought to the meeting, realizing that no amount of money or power could compete with the simple strength of people who refused to be bought. He picked up his phone and dialed his lawyer. Call off the custody case, he said quietly. Sir, are you sure? We have an excellent chance of... Call it off. All of it. The CPS complaints, the school pressure, everything. May I ask why? Richard looked at a photo on his desk, him and his late wife and a young Mara, all smiling before the fire and the fear and the control. Because I'm tired of being the villain in my daughter's story, and because a man in a cheap shirt just taught me what real love looks like." He hung up before his lawyer could respond, before he could second-guess himself, before the fear could make him change his mind. It wasn't surrender. It was the first step towards something he'd lost 4 years ago when the flames took his wife. The ability to let go and trust that the people you love can survive without you, holding on so tight you crush them. The war wasn't over. The media wouldn't stop. The judgment would continue. But Richard Ellison, for the first time in 4 years, was choosing his daughter's happiness over his need to protect her. It was the hardest choice he'd ever made. And somehow, it felt like the first honest thing he'd done since the night of the fire. The call came 3 days later, just as Ethan was steeling himself for the court battle of his life. Marcus Webb's voice was confused when Ethan answered. "I don't know what you did, but Blackstone Legal just withdrew from the case. All of it. The custody challenge, the CPS complaints, everything. They're citing client directive and refusing to elaborate." Ethan sat down slowly on his worn couch. "Richard called them off." "Apparently. The school also contacted me this morning. Sophie can return whenever she's ready, and they've issued a formal apology for the disruption. It's like someone flipped a switch and made all your problems disappear." After hanging up, Ethan stared at his phone for a long moment before texting Mara. "Did you know about this?" "About what?" "Your father. He backed down, called off his lawyers, dropped everything." There was a long pause before she replied. "I didn't ask him to. I don't know why he would." But Ethan thought maybe he did know. He remembered the look in Richard's eyes at that restaurant table, the exhaustion beneath the control, the father buried under the billionaire. Sometimes people surprised you. Sometimes even the worst bullies found their breaking point and chose differently. The media storm didn't end immediately. For another week, reporters camped outside Ethan's building, wrote think pieces about class and romance and fairy tales, debated whether their relationship was exploitation or true love. But without Richard Ellison actively feeding the fire, the story gradually lost its heat. Other scandals emerged. Other people became the target. The news cycle moved on. Ethan found work with a smaller construction company whose owner didn't care about billionaire threats. The pay was slightly less, but the hours were better, and his new boss actually smiled when Ethan mentioned he had a daughter to pick up from school. Sophie returned to Riverside Elementary and was welcomed back by teachers who seemed genuinely ashamed of how they'd handled things. Most of the parents who'd shunned them quietly reversed course, though a few, like Madison's mother, remained coldly distant. Ethan learned to see it as a favor. People who couldn't handle complexity weren't worth knowing anyway. Mara moved into a small studio apartment across town, paid for with money from a trust fund her mother had established that Richard couldn't control. It wasn't much, barely bigger than a closet compared to her father's mansion, but it was hers. She enrolled in community college courses on architecture, tentatively reaching for dreams she'd abandoned 4 years ago. Some days were hard. Some days she couldn't leave her apartment because the world felt too big and too cruel. But more and more often, she managed. She went to class. She had coffee with Ethan. She let Sophie teach her how to make cookies that burned only slightly. She was learning to live again. 2 months after the park bench conversation, on a cold November evening, Ethan's doorbell rang. He opened it to find Richard Ellison standing in his hallway, looking distinctly uncomfortable in a building that probably cost less than his monthly car payment. "Mr. Brooks, may I come in?" Ethan stepped aside wordlessly. Richard entered and looked around the small apartment, taking in the mismatched furniture, the kids' drawings on the refrigerator, the life Ethan had built from scraps and determination. "Sophie's at a sleepover," Ethan said, breaking the awkward silence. "So you can speak freely." Richard nodded. He seemed smaller somehow, less imposing without his lawyers and his mansion and all the trappings of power. "I came to apologize." Whatever Ethan had expected, it wasn't that. "Okay. I've spent the last 2 months in therapy, something I should have done 4 years ago, but..." Richard's voice caught. "Pride is a terrible thing, Mr. Brooks. It makes you believe that admitting you need help is weakness, that controlling everything is strength. What changed?" "I spoke with the detective investigating my wife's death. Mara's memories were accurate. I did cause that fire through my actions, my controlling behavior, my refusal to let her leave, my anger when she tried to take Mara with her. Richard's hands shook slightly. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt, but intent doesn't matter when the outcome is death. Ethan sat down, gesturing for Richard to do the same. The older man sank into the chair Sophie usually occupied for homework. They're not pressing charges, Richard continued. Statute of limitations, insufficient evidence, the complications of prosecuting an accidental death from years ago. But I know the truth. I know that my wife died because I couldn't let go. And I was doing the same thing to Mara, suffocating her with protection because I was terrified of losing her the way I lost her mother. That's why you backed down, not because I refused your offer. Oh, refusing the offer mattered. It showed me that some people can't be bought or intimidated, that there's still integrity in the world. Richard looked directly at Ethan. But yes, the real reason was therapy. My therapist asked me one question that broke through all my defenses. Would your wife want Mara to live this way? And the answer was so clearly no that I couldn't hide from it anymore. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, sirens and car horns, and the sounds of people living their messy, complicated lives. I don't expect forgiveness, Richard said finally, from you or from Mara. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. I've established a trust fund for Sophie's education. I've also created a foundation in my wife's name to help burn victims, something Mara suggested when we finally started talking again. You're talking again? Once a week, supervised by her therapist. A small, sad smile crossed Richard's face. It's painful and difficult and nothing like the relationship we used to have. But it's honest. For the first time in 4 years, we're being honest with each other. That's good. Ethan meant it. Richard stood to leave, then paused at the door. She loves you, you know, really loves you. I can see it in the way she talks about you, about Sophie, the way she started to hope again. I love her too. Then take care of her, not the way I did, not by controlling or protecting or hiding her from the world, but by standing beside her while she figures out who she wants to be. Can you do that? Ethan thought about Mara's smile when she successfully made cookies without burning them, about the way she'd started wearing her hair pulled back, no longer trying to hide her scars, about Sophie calling her almost mom, and Mara not correcting it. Yeah, he said. I can do that. Richard extended his hand. After a moment, Ethan shook it. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever completely, but it was a beginning, a tentative peace between two fathers who'd both learned hard lessons about love and letting go. After Richard left, Ethan called Mara. Your father just came by. I know. I told him where you live. She sounded nervous. I hope that's okay. He wanted to apologize, and I thought maybe you deserved to hear it. It was fine. Good, actually. Ethan smiled into the phone. Are you busy tomorrow? Just studying. Why? Sophie's been asking when we're getting married again. I figured maybe we should discuss it. Silence on the other end, then quietly. Are you proposing right now? Over the phone? Because that's possibly the least romantic thing I've ever heard. No, I'm definitely not proposing over the phone. Ethan laughed. I'm just saying we should talk about it. About us. About what comes next. Okay. He could hear the smile in her voice. Tomorrow. Your place or mine? Yours. Sophie's been dying to see your apartment, and I promised her we'd visit. It's tiny. She's 7. Everything looks big to her. They talked for another hour about nothing important. Her classes, his work, Sophie's latest school project, normal conversation between two people building a life together. When they finally hung up, Ethan sat in his quiet apartment and let himself feel something he'd stopped believing in 2 years ago. Hope. Real hope. The kind that wasn't naive or foolish, but earned through surviving the worst and choosing to keep going anyway. The next day, Sophie declared Mara's studio apartment cozy and immediately started planning how to decorate it. She had opinions about curtains and throw pillows and where the furniture should go, all delivered with the absolute confidence of someone who'd never doubted her right to an opinion. And you need pictures on the walls, Sophie insisted, like we have at home, pictures of people you love. I don't have many pictures, Mara admitted. My father kept them all when I moved out. Then we'll take new ones. Sophie grabbed Ethan's phone and started snapping photos. Mara laughing, Ethan rolling his eyes, the three of them squished together on Mara's tiny couch. See? Now you have pictures. While Sophie explored the apartment's single closet, declaring it perfect for hiding, Ethan and Mara sat on her small balcony that overlooked a parking lot and a slice of city skyline. She's right, Mara said. About the pictures. About starting over. Is that what you want, to start over? I don't think we ever really start over. We just keep going with all our scars and mistakes and baggage. Mara leaned against his shoulder. But I want to keep going with you. If you'll have me. Ethan pulled a small box from his pocket. I was planning a better moment for this. Maybe somewhere romantic. But Sophie's right about one thing. We've waited long enough. He opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring with a small blue stone. It was my grandmother's. It's not expensive or fancy, but it's the only family heirloom I have. And I thought, if you wanted... Yes. Mara was already crying. Yes. Absolutely yes. He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit like it was meant to be there. Like all the pain and chaos and struggle had been leading to this moment, two broken people choosing to be whole together. Sophie appeared in the balcony doorway and immediately started screaming. You're engaged! I knew it! Can I be the flower girl? Did you ask her yet? Oh my gosh, I need to tell Mrs. Chen. She disappeared back inside to find her phone, leaving Ethan and Mara laughing through tears. Are you sure about this? Mara asked. Marriage to me means tabloid coverage when things are slow. It means people always staring, always judging. It means my father at family dinners, trying and probably failing to be appropriate. And it means waking up next to you every morning. It means Sophie having the mother figure she deserves. It means building something real and lasting and ours. Ethan kissed her gently. Yeah, I'm sure. The wedding happened 3 months later in Mrs. Chen's tiny backyard, with folding chairs and homemade decorations and a guest list of exactly 15 people. No press, no photographers they didn't invite, just the people who mattered. Sophie wore her purple dress as flower girl and took her duties extremely seriously, making sure every petal was placed with precision. Mrs. Chen cried through the entire ceremony. Marcus Webb officiated, using his weekend ordination from an online ministry that everyone pretended was very official and legal. Richard Ellison sat in the back row, looking uncomfortable and out of place and genuinely happy for his daughter, a complicated mix that seemed to define their new relationship. When Ethan and Mara said their vows, they wrote them themselves. No generic promises about sickness and health. Just honest words about choosing each other every day, about standing together when the world pushed back, about building a family from love instead of obligation. I promise to see you, Ethan said, his voice steady and clear. Not your scars or your past or what anyone else thinks you should be. Just you. Every single day. I promise to be brave, Mara replied, tears streaming down her face. To keep choosing life and hope and love, even when fear tells me to hide. And I promise to love Sophie like she's mine, because in all the ways that matter, she is. Sophie cheered so loudly at that part that the ceremony had to pause for a full minute. They kissed to applause from their tiny audience. And in that moment, the world was perfect. Not problem-free, not without complications, but perfect in the way real life can be when you stop waiting for circumstances to align and just choose happiness anyway. The reception was potluck in Mrs. Chen's living room. Someone's cousin played guitar badly but enthusiastically. Sophie gave a toast that was mostly about how she was going to be the best big sister ever when they inevitably had babies, which made Mara blush and Ethan laugh. Richard gave a short speech apologizing for his past behavior and welcoming Ethan to the family, which was awkward but sincere. As the evening wound down and guests started leaving, Ethan found himself on Mrs. Chen's back porch with Mara, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. We did it, Mara said softly. We actually did it. Did you doubt we would? Every single day. She turned to face him. Every day I was terrified that I'd wake up and you'd realize I wasn't worth the trouble, that loving me was too hard, too complicated, too much. And now? Now I'm still terrified sometimes. But I'm also sure. Sure that you chose me knowing exactly what you were getting into. Sure that Sophie loves me not despite my scars, but just because I'm me. Sure that we built something real. She touched his face gently. You saved my life, you know. Not by pulling me from a fire or anything dramatic, just by seeing me when everyone else looked away. You saved mine too. You and Sophie. You gave me a reason to be brave, to stand up and fight, instead of just surviving. Inside, they could hear Sophie laughing at something Mrs. Chen said, her voice bright and happy and secure in the knowledge that she was loved. It was the best sound in the world. 6 months later, Mara graduated from community college with honors and was accepted into a prestigious architecture program. She still had hard days, days when leaving the house felt impossible, when the stares and whispers were too much. But she also had good days, increasingly more of them. Days when she walked through campus with her head high, days when she contributed ideas in class without hesitation, days when she looked in the mirror and saw someone who survived instead of someone who was broken. Ethan's construction company promoted him to foreman. The pay increase meant they could finally move to a bigger apartment. Not fancy, but enough space that Sophie had her own room and Mara could have a small home office for her architecture projects. The bathroom didn't leak. The neighborhood was safe. It was everything they needed and nothing they didn't. Sophie thrived. She made new friends who accepted Mara without question, who came over for sleepovers and called her Sophie's mom without thinking about it. She joined the robotics club and the school choir and filled their home with endless energy and joy and occasionally infuriating preteen attitude as she approached her 8th birthday. Richard continued therapy and slowly began rebuilding his relationship with Mara. It wasn't the relationship they'd had before the fire. That was gone forever, killed by years of control and unspoken grief. But it was something new, something more honest. They had dinner once a month, supervised by Mara's therapist for the first year, and then gradually on their own as they learned how to talk without Richard defaulting to control and Mara defaulting to compliance. He attended Sophie's school concerts and Mara's graduation and showed up for holidays, always slightly awkward but genuinely trying. One evening, a year and a half after the wedding, Ethan came home to find Mara and Sophie making dinner together. They were covered in flour, arguing cheerfully about whether the recipe said 1 cup or 2 cups of sugar, clearly having the time of their lives making a mess. "Daddy!" Sophie spotted him first. "We're making cookies for the new neighbors. Mara says it's important to welcome people and make them feel accepted." Mara looked up and smiled, that full, unguarded smile she'd learned to give freely. "We might have gotten a little carried away." "I can see that." Ethan kissed them both, not caring about the flour. "What kind of neighbors?" "A single mom with a teenage son. She looked kind of overwhelmed when I saw her moving in this morning. I thought maybe some cookies and a friendly face might help." Ethan pulled her close, breathing in the smell of vanilla and home. "You're amazing, you know that?" "I had a good teacher." She glanced at Sophie, who was now trying to sneak cookie dough when she thought they weren't looking. "Someone showed me once that kindness matters. That seeing people and treating them with dignity can change everything. I'm just paying it forward." Later that night, after Sophie was in bed and the cookies were delivered to a very grateful new neighbor, Ethan and Mara sat on their small balcony looking at the city lights. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Mara asked. "If you hadn't stood up that day in the cafe? If you'd just let me leave?" "Sometimes. Usually late at night when I can't sleep." Ethan squeezed her hand. "But then I wake up and you're there, and Sophie's singing in the shower, and I realize I don't want to think about other versions. This version, messy and complicated and ours, is exactly what I want." "Even with all the scars?" "Especially with the scars, yours and mine both. They're proof we survived, proof we kept going when it would have been easier to give up." Mara rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Ethan Brooks." "I love you too, Mara Brooks." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the world turn, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and complications. Mara's architecture program would get harder. Ethan's work would have busy seasons and slow seasons. Sophie would keep growing up with all the drama that entailed. Richard would have good days and bad days in his ongoing journey toward being a better father. Life would continue to be messy and uncertain and occasionally overwhelming, but they would face it together, as a family, as people who'd chosen each other when the world said they shouldn't, as proof that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the moments we almost run from, the moments when we choose courage over comfort and love over fear. Inside their apartment, Sophie had snuck out of bed to grab a cookie from the cooling rack. She saw her parents on the balcony, silhouetted against the city lights, and smiled. She'd asked Mara once why people stared at her scars, and Mara had said simply, because they don't know what we know, that the things that make us different are often the things that make us strongest. Sophie liked that answer. She liked having a mom who was brave and honest and taught her that being scared was okay as long as you didn't let fear win. She liked having a dad who worked hard and kept promises and showed her that love was about showing up every day, not just when things were easy. She ate her cookie, it was slightly burned but perfect anyway, and went back to bed, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and safe and part of something bigger than herself. The years rolled on. Mara finished her architecture degree and got a job with a firm that specialized in accessible design for burn survivors and people with disabilities. Her first major project was a community center that won awards for its innovative approach to inclusive spaces. Richard attended the opening ceremony and told anyone who would listen that his daughter was brilliant, no longer trying to claim credit, just genuinely proud. Sophie became a teenager with all the eye-rolling and drama that entailed, but she never lost her fundamental kindness or her absolute certainty that her family was exactly as it should be. She volunteered with the Burn Survivor Foundation Richard had established, mentoring younger kids and showing them that scars didn't define you. Ethan eventually started his own small construction company with Marcus Webb as his business partner and lawyer. They specialized in renovation work for families who couldn't afford the big contractors, a way of paying forward all the help they'd received when they were struggling. The company never made them rich, but it made them proud. And through it all, through triumphs and setbacks, through good years and hard years, through all the normal chaos of building a life, Ethan and Mara kept their promises. They saw each other. They stayed brave. They chose love every single day, even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they went back to Miller's Coffee House where it all started. The cafe had changed ownership and been renovated, but the corner table was still there. They sat where they'd sat that first afternoon, holding hands across the table, and ordered coffee and tea from a new generation of baristas who had no idea they were witnessing a private celebration. 5 years, Mara said, tracing the rim of her teacup. Some days it feels like forever. Other days it feels like we just started. Any regrets? She pretended to think about it. Well, you did ruin my life. Before you, I was safely miserable in my father's mansion. Now I have to deal with a preteen stepdaughter's mood swings and your terrible jokes and actually participating in the world. Sounds awful. The worst, she smiled, best decision I ever made. Ethan raised his coffee cup. To 5 more years, and 5 after that, and however many we get. To however many we get, Mara echoed, as long as we get them together. They clinked cups and drank, 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way and built something beautiful from the broken pieces. 2 people who proved that sometimes the best love stories aren't about perfection. They're about choosing each other, scars and all, and building a life from courage instead of fear. Outside the cafe windows, the city rushed by. People living their own complicated stories, fighting their own battles, searching for their own moments of connection. And inside, at a corner table, a construction worker and an architect sat holding hands, no longer afraid of being seen, no longer running from the world's judgment. Just 2 people who'd learned that the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be fully known and fully loved. And that sometimes the first look no one wanted becomes the beginning of everything.